On today's episode of the Pretend GM, I got to sit down with Tera Roberts and talk to her about her unique perspective of how she analyzes fantasy football. She's had the opportunity to work at so many different great companies throughout this industry. And along the way, at each of those stops, she's gotten to learn something from all of the biggest and brightest names from the fantasy football industry. Here's my conversation with Tera Roberts, who, just like you and me, is a Pretend GM. Well, thank you for coming on here today. I'm really excited to talk to you. I mean, there's the whole point of this podcast has been to try to bridge the gap between people playing fantasy football and then people like us who are lucky enough to even just make a single dollar from talking about it or writing about it. And like once, I can't even say this joke for you because you're already cool and you have your own place. But like I always say, like once we all move out of our mom's basement, like we're really gonna get things going.
Yeah.
And you're such a great guest to have on because you give such a unique perspective on this. Like not a lot of people, most people have worked at maybe one or two places or never even get the opportunities that you've gotten. You're so impressive. I can imagine doing all these different things has maybe changed the way that you view fantasy football, the way you think about it, the way you analyze it, the way you draft, everything that you do on a daily basis with this game. If you could rewind back to the first time you jumped into a fantasy league and you're like, what's fantasy football and everything that you fell in love with then, what's the biggest difference between that version of Tera versus how you look at the game now?
I was playing as a fan back then. And I have no shame in admitting that.
It was just all Clemson players, just
yeah,
everything.
it was, and I'm a Packers fan, so I would overdraft Aaron Rodgers and I would pair him with Eddie Lacy. Just pure stupid, reckless abandon, no logical sense whatsoever. And there's nothing wrong with like honoring.
How'd that work out for you?
It didn't, you'd be surprised. Like, I don't know why an Aaron Rodgers, Eddie Lacy combination just didn't work out,
Didn't work out great for the Packers either, no.
Yeah, no, not at all. There's nothing wrong with like leaning into your fandom. That's fun. We want fantasy football to be fun, and it's better when you care about your players and your team. You just have to be smart about it. Like, hey, when Jordan Love was about to start, I was very much so pro Jordan Love and, based it around, hey, these are the reasons XYZ. It made logical sense to me. If I didn't believe in him, I probably wouldn't have pushed it so badly. Like, there's limits to what you got to do. You can care about your fandom, but at the same time, you want to approach it in a logical way and not throw ADP, caution to the wind, and drafting your favorite quarterback in the first round.
Yeah, I think there's something that's always gonna get our biases. Like we have our fandoms, even without the fandom. We just have players that we tend to like.
Yes.
I know sometimes like I will maybe rank a player higher or draft a player higher because I'm like, but he's good. He's good at football. And you need that context. Like that player might be really good, but the situation still kind of sucks. And you need to, understand that, especially when going through all this. Have you found that there is one strategy or approach that you always just keep coming back to no matter what format you're playing? So just a tried and true method of playing this game?
Yeah, I would say there's probably two things. The big strategy or approach that I lean into and I tend not to abandon is hero RB. Um, I don't judge people that go zero RB, but I love a nice, clean, clear RB1 to headline my team. And I've also been accused, and it's also sometimes can be very specific because I have been accused of being heavy PPR favoritism. So sometimes people don't like those, get mad when you're like the PPR running backs they're cheating. They're like, oh, that Austin Eckler. And my favorites are always I'm looking for the PPR god. I want the pass catching running back. I don't mind I drafted Jonathan Taylor and I like him this year. But it doesn't make me super excited. I love to see the running backs just patching or casting the patches and just running amok and just, getting 8 receptions. It brings me joy. I do. I love it.
Yeah.
So that's what I always go back to.
I love the way you said it. It's like I'm a big proponent of hero RB. Just no offense to the people that enjoy Tera Roberts, it's not for me. It's almost like you were talking about like how people enjoy their steaks cooked. Like,
Yeah,
no offense to you, just not for me.
exactly.
So I assume that going through, your career, you've met so many brilliant analysts throughout your time, and you've experienced so many different facets of this game. You mentioned you DFS and Dynasty and so many different parts of it. What's been the biggest influence on how you approach fantasy football? Has it been a person or a time in your career, maybe something you've come across?
I think I wouldn't say a specific person, although there are definitely specific people who I love their style. I don't want to say that I copy their style, but it influences me in terms of, ideas and different ways to approach things. But I think kind of the biggest thing that um, has influenced me is more so the people in the audience, the consumers. I remember the first person telling me like, hey, you helped me win my league, or hey, I like this video series that you do. I watch it every single time. I think kind of the like people directly saying, because there are views on stuff, people are watching stuff, but to think that people are consistently coming back or seeking or like you specifically or appreciate the advice you give, that's been the biggest influence on me because when you're writing stuff, I feel like sometimes it's a tough balance because you want to, as a creator, you want to create things that are interesting and going to grab attention because you have to do that. I mean, it's I do a lot of stuff on TikTok, and one of the easiest ways to get views is to, and I don't do this, and probably why I don't have as many views as I would love. Hot takes are the easiest way. Big, bold,
Yeah.
hot takes. They drive the views. But I think a lot of times, sometimes, you lose touch of the fact that there are real people that are trying that they're trying to win their one league, and they don't need the hot takes. They need the very straightforward information. So one of the things that has influenced me the most is that my audience and a lot of people that I listen to, I want to deliver very straightforward information and avoid the hot takes that are going to generate clicks. I just want to deliver simple, accurate information that is very consumable to help people win. And I think that's probably why I tend to lean towards enjoying, like you were saying, videos, and short videos and live Q&A, direct questions from people, short ways to get them information, that is not overly complicated, and I can be long-winded. That's not to say I don't sit there and talk on a podcast for an hour, because I do. I'll sit there and talk on the side of the red one. This is I want to do it for an hour by myself. But it's still the same approach of delivering information in a way that is meant to truly help people. So when I'm creating content, the goal is specific to the consumer.
Yeah, I think it's so having the consumer, the audience be such an impact on how you do things. It can be a good and a bad thing. Like, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes they're gonna let you know, like, hey, this really great, this saved my league. There's other times they're gonna let you know, like, hey, you were wrong, idiot. And like they're gonna get into your comments and um like sometimes it can get tough to remain authentic and remain genuine with your opinions on things, because sometimes you ask yourself, like, is this gonna get more clicks? I mean, would this maybe be better? And then like I love that you're saying this, you don't really lean into that too much. And that's such a great way to approach this game level-headed, right? And I know that when you're doing this content, you're trying to connect with the audience. You're trying to
Right.
connect with these fantasy players. And I think no matter what, us and fantasy players, they will have their biases. They'll have, things that they do that will kind of just be the common mistakes. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see fantasy players making year after year?
I think kind of when we might have touched on it a little bit early, but take lock is one that I think happens a lot, to everybody. Players and situations change. You don't have to be locked into, like, sometimes you'll see someone comment, "Well, you didn't like this person last year." Yeah, that will change. And situations change, and I may like them this year. I think we see it a lot with rookies in particular. Guys that you like before the draft. You love them, you're passionate. They were fantastic in college. You truly believe that this guy is going to hit. And then we get to the draft and they don't get the draft capital that you think they should just deserve. You're like, well, that's crazy. Or you think, well, this team got a steal. But then they're buried in a bad depth chart or a bad situation here. But you're convinced that they are truly a diamond in the rough. And we ignore the fact that the NFL thought less, and not even that they thought less, because there's late round values and I love that for sure. But when you see a guy go from this could be a first round pick to drafted in the fourth round, sometimes we gotta let go of our biases on that one and say, if someone dropped, there might be a reason. I think that's how we end up overdrafting players a lot. Like, you swear up and down that a Blake Corum is just he's stealing that job from Kyron Williams because of what you believed before the draft, that he was deserving of falling into a spot where he would be the RB1. So you want him to be the RB1. Or preseason takes of Zamir White is going to steal Josh Jacobs' job only for him to go on to have an insane career year. We get locked into these things and kind of ignore what teams are telling us. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that I see people making year after year.
Yeah, I see it all the time, and it's not even just with the rookies. I think there's sort of, I hate to use this word because it's way too profound for fantasy football, but there is sort of like an infection that we get where it's like, if I play best ball, I'm going to let that best ball brain bleed over into the way I play redraft or dynasty. We're really excited about this rookie draft, man. We're letting that bleed over into how we approach redraft. Like so much of that happens instead of compartmentalizing. We get these preconceived notions. And I know this happens a lot with injuries in particular, where for example, we're filming this here in July of 2025. Last year, Kenneth Walker missed important weeks during the fantasy playoffs. So people hold those biases against them. Last year, Christian McCaffrey struggled with the Achilles injury. People will hold on to that forever and ever and make this a thing year after year. I'm never going to draft that player again because they ruined those 2 weeks for me, or I draft them early and they got hurt, right?
Yeah.
When you're making roster decisions, whether it's drafting, starting, stuff like that, do you actively try to avoid the injury prone or quote injury prone players, or do you want to try to capitalize on maybe some of their lower draft costs? Like, how do you approach injury history?
I try to be optimistic, and I think sometimes it's situational. As long as there's an appropriate discount on a player, I'm okay with taking the risk. And then I think you also have to assess what is actually an injury-prone player versus somebody who we might have overreacted. I remember someone who I defended so much was Keenan Allen. He had this weird perception that he's so injury prone. He's so injury prone. And when you actually look back at it and you say he's not injury prone, there's just you can have one or two things that happen, and all of a sudden if you miss a couple of games in the wrong spot, people feel a little weird about it.
You know what that was for Keenan Allen? It was that one game where he goes up to the camera, says, "All right, well, start me tonight," and then just nothing happens.
Which I loved, because that made me love him even more, because I like, even if he was wrong, started him.
You like
players. I like that he acknowledged us. I like I like it when players acknowledge us, good or bad or anything. I mean, even Josh Jacobs, his disdain for fantasy, but he acknowledges us. It's funny. He said, I don't care about your fantasy team. It's why it's funny. I think it's funny when they acknowledge that we exist and we're not just some random blip on the side. So yeah, that was actually one of my favorite moments. And I did definitely start him because I just had a ton of Keenan Allen shares. That was my boy. Still holding up faith that he'll, sign somewhere. But yeah, that's exactly like that. But then you get to a guy like J.K. Dobbins, and you look at that and you say, yeah, this is somebody who flat out has a clear pattern with injury, and you hate that for him, but you have to take it into account. And if you get to the chance where he's actually healthy and you get a massive discount, that is when I will lean in and say, okay, I'm okay with this. Like last year, J.K. Dobbins, when he uh, it's before free agency that he was, saying, okay, I'm healthy, I'm back and whatnot. And I was doing pre-draft best ball, and I was just clicking J.K. Dobbins at the end of every single draft because I'm like, he's gonna land somewhere, man. I feel it in my gut if we can get some good value on this. And it worked out. It worked out in having good value and gave us, my God, he even came back from an injury. So that was cool. Showed us that he can, come back mid-season. It won't be catastrophic. But if the discount is there and appropriate, I don't mind taking chances on guys that are talented and high reward if they are able to actually make it through a season.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be a calculated risk with drafting any player, but especially ones that have had an injury history. And I guess sometimes you just have to figure out like is the I can't think of a better terminology here. Is the juice worth the squeeze, right? Like,
Yeah.
is the value really there for me? And but if someone's listening to this later on in the future, like right now, there's probably going to be a lot of discourse back about how we treated Christian McCaffrey this year. Where I remember
Yes.
earlier in the offseason, I was telling myself, you know what? I don't want any part of it. Like, I don't want to waste a draft pick early in round 1 or round 2, whatever it ends up being. And now the more I think about it, I'm just like, well, then why am I playing fantasy football if you're not willing to take some
Yeah.
risks? Like Christian McCaffrey could absolutely, once again, be the RB1. And I can get him at the end of the first round or early second round. Like, that's great. So yeah, there's definitely always gonna be some risk and some value that comes to it. But I think the tough thing here is trying to balance drafting upside versus safety or the consistency. I think there's a little bit of a fallacy of consistency in fantasy football.
Yes.
Like, how do you try to balance that when you're picking players for your roster or even setting a starting lineup, going upside versus safety?
I think when we're looking at consistency, we got to separate it into two separate buckets. There is year over year consistency, like a AJ Brown kind of consistency, right? Where
Mhm.
we know that is he gonna get the overall wide receiver one, just Jamar Chase numbers? No. But there is value in the fact that we know that we are going to get XYZ out of him. And that is great. And that makes him worthy of his draft spot. And then there is in season consistency. I say this with my Clemson stuff in the background. My boy T. Higgins, he struggles with the in season consistency. The overall numbers are going to look solid, but sometimes the experience along the way, it's not as fun as what it looks like at the end of the season. You look at that and say, okay, yeah, I'm wide receiver 18. That was cool. Um, but the peaks and valleys are not maybe the most enjoyable fantasy experience. So I think when I'm looking at upside versus consistency, I always lean towards upside, and sometimes the league affects that as well. I like to be very flexible in my draft strategy and adjust based on the league. Sometimes a good, consistent team can get you the win, especially like maybe you're looking at a home league, right? And you are the best player in your home league, and you can take all the risks you want, but actually being the most consistent drafter and making the most logical choices is probably going to get you just the easiest path to a victory. And then there are other times where you have to actively try to aim for upside. Like in the I just or we're middle of Scott Fish Bowl, and the first four players that I took off the board were purely high upside players. Like these are guys that can truly be the number one overall at their position. And I might not take that same strategy in another league. So I try to tend to be a little bit flexible about how I'm balancing it versus, different league types and best ball and redraft and dynasty and tournaments and whatnot. Um, but I definitely lean more towards the upside in that I try to avoid players that tend to be inconsistent in season, unless we're talking best ball. That's the way that I tend to lean.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned you looking at the league, and right, and that can be everything from the scoring setting to league size to roster size to if it's a tournament like Scott Fishbowl, like you're mentioning there. I think that when there's a larger roster, like more starting spots, you can afford to actually go a little bit more with the risk and the upside because it's just more lottery scratchers there. Whereas if you're going up against someone and it's like 6 starting spots, it's like, well, and you're projected to win, let's just keep it safe, right? Like, and that will happen. I think people will, they tend to overthink things sometimes, right? And I think especially one of the places where we overthink it is picking up players off the waiver wire, where we might look at a guy who had one crazy outlier week and we're like, let me throw all my fab on this player. Or we do the other thing, or we're just like, nope, I'm going to hoard all of this fab is free agent auction budget is like, I'm going to hold on to all of this for the end of the season when I may get to the playoffs and I can go and get that player that's going to help me win, and you never make it there.
Yeah.
So what's your process like evaluating waiver wire pickups? Because I know you do a great job with your waiver wire content, especially deep league stuff and looking at some of maybe the lesser known waiver wire players that are out there. How do you enter that process where you're looking at picking up some of these guys and maybe letting go of some underperforming players that you drafted?
For me, it's always risk versus reward. When I do waiver wire content, I make sure that I make it clear if someone is a long-term ad or if it's just somebody that's going to get you by in a pinch. So that way you can assess like, hey, this is a home run hitter. This is a guy that you need to just I mean, am I going to say dump all your fab? But I will tell you, hey, to get him, you gotta let it all go because everyone is going to be trying to get him. And if you want it, you got to go out and get it. But you have to assess the type of player that it is that you're adding. And once you know the type of player that you're adding, then you can assess if it's worth dropping certain players. Because what is the risk of losing a player? Am I dropping a player that has league winning upside around the corner potentially? Or am I dropping a player that is just a consistent, I can turn to him and he can get me 10 fantasy points in a pinch and I know I'm okay with that. Like let's say like last year, I was a very big into Chase Brown. And you had to invest in him. That ADP wasn't coming cheap. It wasn't super expensive, but it was not coming cheap because, I guess people like me pumped it up and said, it's gonna be Chase Brown. But you drafted him. And if you were looking week 1, week 2, the result was obviously abysmal. And it was looking like, Zach Moss, Chase Brown, bus, whatever. But you have to look at why you drafted Chase Brown. And remember, we didn't go into it expecting that he was going to be the starter. You didn't expect to get week 1 results. So why are you going to fault him for not getting week 1 results? You expected him to earn his role, show what he can do. Because that was essentially, he got a little bit of like a tiny bit of play his rookie year, but had dealt with a ton of injuries and wasn't active for a whole bunch of games, was on the pup. So it was essentially year 1. And this was a situation where it was going to be a committee. We knew that Zach Moss was the more experienced back. And were expecting that this was something where he was going to have to get on the field, show what he can do, and just flat out outperform over Zach Moss or potentially wait for an injury to happen and whatnot. So you look at that and you're looking at guys that you want to add on waiver wire. I would never advise you in that situation to drop Chase Brown because that is someone whose potential and what you drafted him knowingly was not going to hit immediately. So you can't let go. You have to kind of assess those situations with players and whether or not you're drafting him. I like to tell this story a lot. There was Amon-Ra St. Brown's rookie year. I held on to him as long as I could. And the knowledge and the logic behind it is that this guy is not going to produce. He's not going to. But you hold on. We're holding on because at some point, this man is going to have league winning upside. You just got to hold on. And I held on, man. I held on as long as humanly possible until I got to a bye week snafu, and there was just no physical way. If I had held on to him, I was going to have to go without a starter. It was like a bad situation. So I dropped him, and
Oh,
I was like, I'll circle back around and I'll pick him back up. It's gonna be okay. And let me just get through this bye week. It was my family league. My brother, of all people, the audacity. That's why you can't talk to your family. No, I'm just kidding.
Aaron Rodgers agrees. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. My brother scooped him up, and of course, we meet in the championship, and he's got Amon-Ra St. Brown, and who you stay him with Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I knew it. I knew it. It was one of those situations where I knew that I had to hold on to him, and I just couldn't. But that's fantasy football. You've got to, when you're making these ads and drops, you have to be aware. If you're dropping a player, know why you were holding on to him in the first place. And just try to evaluate it that way.
Man, yeah, I'm sure everyone that's something I think that makes fantasy football so relatable is whether you've been doing this for years or you just started, like everyone has had that moment where you just instantly regret something, and or even like you said, it almost feels like it's out of your control a little
Yeah.
bit.
Mhm.
I know that one of the times where we all try to feel like we're very much in control, almost to a fault, is when we're saying, okay, I need to go make a trade. I need to go get a player for my team. And I think everyone has a different process. And I know that the toughest person to deal with is the one that believes they are just constantly the smartest in the room, right?
Yep.
That is a tough way to try to negotiate a trade for your team. How do you typically find a trade in your league that's worth pursuing? Like just even looking for a player. What's the psychology that goes to even just speaking with that other manager in your league? What's that process like?
So I have learned, for me personally, and this may vary from, individual to individual, if I go chasing a specific player, I will overpay. And I have had to curb myself from doing
You
that.
hear that, everyone in Tara's leagues? She will overpay. Write it down. Okay.
Yeah, if I'm chasing a play, if I'm passionate and I'm chasing, I will overpay. And over time, I have learned I need to try not to chase players. So what I tend to do is look for look for what needs am I looking for rather than a specific player. So I look at my team and say, maybe a mid-season, and say, okay, I feel like I need to reinforce my running back. Like I can foresee that this could be an issue heading into the playoffs. So I need to probably take care of that right now. And so rather than going and saying, okay, this is the running back that I want, I go and I look at everybody's team, which is like a, tedious process, but I go and look at everybody's team and I say, okay, who has a running back that can fill the needs that I want, that I like, and what kind of need do they have as well? And if it matches up, because I like for both of us to win, because I don't enjoy. I just say I haven't taken advantage, but I tend not to try to, because it makes me feel a little bit bad. I want to have a situation where the trade benefits both of us. So I try to lean that direction, look for this is what suits us both, because then we can both make logical, cost-effective decisions where neither one of us is just getting into a bad situation. And that also makes the league fun, right? Because then um, you can trust that I'm not going to try and get over on you, right? And so we can have a trade relationship, and where we feel like there's a openness that will work out for the both of us.
I'm so glad you said that because that's something that has been kind of the common thread amongst everyone that I've asked this question to is let's just do something that actually works. There is no winning a trade. How you win a trade is just by creating a successful relationship with someone else in your league, right? Where they can say, "Yeah, I'll do this again with you." I think my favorite times where I've done a trade is when someone said, "This was so easy and seamless. Thank you for making this easy." And I was like, "Great. I can't wait to talk to you again next time we need to make a trade." Not
Exactly.
the not the person who's just like like a dynasty, like we'll throw in another fifth round pick
Yeah.
and then that'll be the sweetener. It's like
Yeah.
that's not enjoyable. Like nobody wants to haggle. Like that's not what we're doing.
Exactly.
I know that like as we especially for like redraft leagues, you get towards the end of the season, and this is when I think there are more start sit decisions that come up than ever, really, especially when you're leading into the playoffs. Those are the most crucial weeks. and you will have people saying, okay, I have this guy that I drafted early. He's one of my quote studs, but he's been underperforming. I just picked up this other wide receiver or this handcuff running back that should have a big week, has a good matchup. How do you go about giving that advice or even taking that own advice?
Yeah.
Like deciding to start the quote stud who's been on your roster that you put the high draft capital into versus this person that you picked up off waivers. They had the good matchup. You're not quite sure how they're going to do.
I'm very much a start your studs kind of person. I don't like to advise people to sit them. It's got to be a Patrick Surtain level matchup for me to contemplate sitting a stud player. So yeah, but it's very straightforward for me. It's start your studs unless you're in that one matchup where it's like, ugh, man, he's shut down everybody.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny. JJ Zacharyson said like one of the things that he finds that most people overrate is matchups. And while yes, there is obviously there's value to it, but sometimes we do it so much to the point where you mentioned a player earlier like Zamir White. Well, or say, yeah, well, Zamir White's going up against the 32nd ranked rush defense this week. He's gonna pop off, and he still gives you the 8 points, and you're just like, well, probably overrated that matchup a little bit. All of us have been there where we've started a player that we shouldn't have or drafted a player we shouldn't have. I think what kind of defines you, especially as a fantasy football analyst, someone who has to do this year in and year out, is living with those mistakes and how you fix them going forward, what you learn from them. What's that process like for you, figuring out why you missed and how it might shape a future analysis for you?
I mean, I have an easy scapegoat position of that. Like I was saying earlier, since things are never really hot takes for me, they're backed up by stats and analytics. Um, 9 times out of 10, the process was right. The outcome just didn't align with it. So I'm not going to feel too bad about that. Now, I do hate, like, when I watch games on Sunday. 9 times out of 10, I'm not thinking about my fantasy teams as much as like, oh man, I said his name 20 times. Oh, I like that. I don't like that. But it's when it comes to that for me, it's really stats, situations and offensive fit overall. When I get to the end of the season, if there's a player that I wildly miss on, I like to, this is where like fantasy tools come in. I like to try and look at the stats and deeper stats and try and figure out and analyze why did it go sideways? Why did it not go the way that I expected?
Do you have a favorite stat or, a data point that you like to reference when looking at this?
The thing that I always turn to the most, and this is weird, and it just overall with players, um, I like to look at where, especially particularly receivers, I like to look at alignments. That's something that I lean towards first and try and find anomalies. Like I was looking at Christian Kirk the other day, trying to justify why the struggle towards the end there in Jacksonville. And I was like, okay, well, because on the surface you could say, okay, there was, there were occasions where a snap count would dip and whatnot. So you're trying to like line it up and look at when, okay, so when was Gabe Davis injured? When was this? When was that? When then try and look at the alignments and was it that he had to move over, and play a different role or something? And then to be with him, there was no rhyme or reason, but that's what I like to look into to try and see if there's some kind of justification for why something went sideways.
Yeah, usage is always a thing to go back to. And I know that you're the only person that has said that here. It's just you can't really score fantasy points if you're not out there on the field, and then we don't know how you're getting used. It's the big context equalizer, right? I think a lot of people will do what's been dubbed the box score scouting, where you'd be like, well,
Yeah.
he only caught 2 passes. It's like, yeah, but he was out there for 90% of routes and got targeted 10 times. Like, it's just a fluke, we can go back
Yes.
to this player again next week. So I mean, we talk about a lot of different things that have affected the way you look at fantasy football, and a lot about your philosophy and how you do this, and plenty of great lessons in there for an audience member. But if you could give the audience member one piece of advice to improve their fantasy game, let's say it is Tera Roberts' golden rule, the thing that I'm going to put on the thumbnail, what would it be?
That's simple. Just be open to changing your perspective. I mean, we've talked about it like multiple, and that's why it's my golden rule. I think I mentioned it like 3 times. Um, don't get take lock. It's a real thing. Be open to changing your perspective on players on a year-to-year basis. You're not a hypocrite. You're adjusting with how situations are changing.
I love that. I love that. There's a man now all the guests are starting to blur together, but it was one of the guests mentioned, like being able, I think it was Sigmund Bloom, actually, our first guest that I had on here, is accepting a new reality. Right. It's like new information comes in, but because it doesn't match what you want, you're instantly like, no, that's not it.
Yeah.
Speaking of new reality, there is a future of fantasy football that is here in many ways. We have endless tools, endless amounts of data, all kinds of new analysis. AI has become a hot button issue.
Yep.
Whether it has been for writing data, in-app tools, a lot of questions around how it's used. I'm still self-admittedly very mixed on it. I think there are many good uses for it. There are many uses that just scare the life out of me. I think there can be some good uses for it with consumers. What are your thoughts on AI, how it's being used for consumers, how it's being used for analysis?
So I'm an avid AI user in general, in a non-football capacity. I've worked with AI a lot, and I understand what the tools are, how to actually use them, and how to get the best information out of them. A lot of testing with AI, and when it comes to AI and fantasy football or football in general, there is one thing I want to caution people when it comes to AI if you're using it as a consumer. AI does not do a good job with football statistics. And that's a timing issue because you have to remember that we're using current information. And AI most accurately pulls historical information, and because that's what it's been trained on. It's been trained on past information, rather than like if you there sometimes it doesn't understand the year that it's on, and you have to force it to understand something, and that can make it very tricky. So it tends to kind of struggle when it comes to, and when football statistics are um, so deep that I think it just makes it confusing in general. You can confuse AI. So you have to be very cautious with that. I like to use AI for logic things. Like if you were to ask AI, like what's the commonalities between guys that have won rookie of the year for the past 10 years, like for a betting purpose? AI would give you an accurate assessment of, hey, it's these positions. They were on these types of teams. They did this, they did that. And those are things that you can trust because that would be like factual information. The stats are hard. There are companies that use football stats in AI tools like for predictive analytics. And that's a different thing, in my opinion, because they're feeding data in and using AI with the data that they're feeding in. But when you're asking AI to give you data and statistics, that's where you get into trouble. So, like historical data, trends, and logic, those kind of things make sense. Like maybe you play DFS and you would like AI to, give you an overview of the best strategies for DFS or something like that as a consumer. Like that makes logical sense. They can explain and break down things in a way that would make sense for you. But you should probably not turn to AI in week 3 and say, give me a DFS lineup. That would not be a good idea for you to do.
Right. Right. Yeah, I believe it was, I keep referencing him, but Sigmund Bloom was the first guest we had on here. He said like AI can kind of just be your intern that does the work you don't want to do.
Yeah.
Organizing the spreadsheets for you and like just doing a bunch of stuff that's going to save you time. I think it's when it starts to replace people is when we are having issues. And I'm just begging people, like watch just one movie, like watch anything that has sentient, beings like that. No. No, not even.
Yeah.
Okay. So Tara, I have to say, and I'm not just blowing smoke, like, you have given so much good to this show, to the fantasy community. We've gotten to meet each other a couple times, and it's just been a pleasure to talk with you every single time. I feel like I learned a little bit more today sitting here in this podcast. I became a better fantasy player. I think the audience did as well. Please let everybody know where they can find your work and what you're up to.
You can follow, first of all, the best place to find me is on social media at It's Tera Time, ITSTERATIME. Anything that I do will be through there. There will be changes coming in this season, so expect
excited. Okay.
no, it's exciting. Gonna have a lot more opportunities to do a lot more. I like doing as much variety as humanly possible. I'm an avid DFS player, and the opportunity to put out DFS content is something that brings me a lot of joy. So we're gonna be a very holistically well-rounded football season with fantasy football and DFS and betting. So it's going to be a little bit of everything, and lots of it coming out here. So a heavy focus on content creation this season. This will probably be my season with the most content that's going to be come out. So yeah, stay tuned for it.
There you go, audience. You wanted more Tera, you get more Tera this year and doing all kinds of different things. Well, Tera, thank you so much for joining me here today. And as always, I just want to thank everybody for watching or listening all the way through. This show does not happen without you guys, and we don't have jobs in this fantasy industry without you guys. So as always, thank you so much. For myself, for Tera, I'll see you next time. Adios.